Hey, Heart Healers, welcome to episode 2 of our Heal the Hurt podcast. I'm your host, William Samuel, as always, and today our guest on the show is a close and long-term friend of mine. His name is Cameron, aka Cammy. He is from Scotland. We studied at university together, and I guess the reason I wanted to bring him on the show was primarily due to the fact that we share a similar outlook on life and share a lot of similar perspectives and ideas. And throughout the entire friendship or time we've known one another, we've managed to keep in consistent contact, which I would say is quite unusual for both of us. I'm sure Cameron would agree. And yeah, so I wanted to bring him on today to bounce some of those ideas that me and him would often bounce with one another with you guys. So Cam, tell us where you're from, who you are, what you do.
So my name is, as you said, Cameron Madden. I come from Scotland, born and raised. Spent the first 23, 24 years of my life in Scotland. I am a freelance writer mostly nowadays. I've been for the last few years, covering a strangely wide range of topics. And yeah, I'm just trying to find my way in the world and, work towards hopefully finding a way to work with minds and be either a therapist or a counselor or, a writer that kind of covers those areas.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so me and you both studied psychology together. We lived together for, I think, how long did we live together? Like 4 years, 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
3 years. So myself and Cameron both studied psychology at the same university, both graduated at the same time, shared a lot of similar interests with the areas of psychology that we were studying. So I guess neither of us have actually put our qualification to professional use as of yet.
Not yet, no.
I suppose still have a vested interest in it. So yeah, Cam, I guess what I wanted to share with people today that may be listening to this is more about your freelancing. So I don't know if many people would be familiar with what a freelance writer is, but obviously you've shared a lot of that with me, and I have a good understanding of kind of what you write about and what you talk about. But if you want to give us a bit more info on what kind of started you with that, and yeah, where you're at with it now.
Yeah. So I moved out to Spain in 2017 on like somewhat of an impulsive, but good decision in the long run. But certainly it was a bit spur of the moment, which is I'm not known for my spontaneous decisions.
I can attest to that. He is not a spontaneous person.
No. And so moved out to Spain with no Spanish, no job prospects, nothing. And
any Spanish now?
Un poco. Not enough that after being there for 2 years you'd think I would know more, but I sort of took up freelancing out of necessity. I couldn't find any work and stumbled across this website where basically you bid on projects and people hire you and you write for them. And I've done that ever since, but it's obviously taken me through a range of different areas and topics.
Yeah, and I guess before we actually go into the topics here, I think it's probably important to highlight, just to give a bit of background on you, so that it's relevant to kind of what we're going to get into. But what growing up, obviously you're from Scotland, so I don't know if people will be familiar, but Scotland is a Christian country, heavily Christian, and it's generally divided into Protestant and Catholic. So it's a inherently religious country. But I guess just tell us a little bit about growing up, what your background is, your beliefs and stuff growing up, and kind of what led you to then studying psychology, which is where we met.
Yeah. So like you say, it's mostly Christian, Protestant, and Catholic. My larger family are Catholic, it's a Catholic family. But I grew up atheist. Like I've never had religious belief in my life. It's never been a part of who I am. It's something that I've always kind of wondered about, because I remember even as like a kid kind of being confused as to why I didn't believe. It was always something that felt like it was sort of beyond my reach. Like I couldn't quite grasp it. Whatever belief was, it was always kind of, just out of reach. And I guess my beliefs never really kind of wavered from that. I've always been, I probably describe myself as like agnostic now. But yeah, I guess atheist is probably the simplest way of describing most of my life.
When you say agnostic now, I guess some people might not be familiar with the those four quadrants of belief. But when you say agnostic, what do you mean specifically, just in case anyone isn't fully across?
So, from my understanding of the definitions, an atheist essentially denies the existence of any god.
Yes.
It's like there's none of it. Whereas an agnostic denies that there's evidence for God, but doesn't deny the possibility that one could exist. And so for me, within my belief, I don't necessarily believe that there is a God. I don't pray. I don't like worship anything. But I also acknowledge that we don't fully understand things. And to me, a God could be a sort of multi-dimensional being, or just some larger sort of, I don't know, it could be anything. And because we don't understand, like, I mean, we know so little in relation to the universe and like our place in it, that we have no idea. This could be a simulation, and God could just be somebody sitting at a big fancy computer,
Honestly, it's funny you say that, because I'm not even joking. Like the past 3 days, I don't know, maybe it's just the frame of mind I'm in, but I'm like, I've been contemplating that, like sitting, is any of this even like real? Like, why am I here? Like, is anything that I'm actually seeing? What if I could, like, I suppose this is actually probably possible, because I was just about to say, what if I could like create the reality that I'm in, like actually, modify it? But I guess, obviously, manifestation and the mindset, you kind of do create your own reality. But just coincidental, I guess. I think the important point for me to highlight here, obviously, because no one will really know you, like, obviously, compared to how I would, but from the whole time we have known each other, since we met in like 2012 or 2011, lived together for like 3.5, 4 years approximately. I can't remember exactly, but Cammy was always a like devout atheist, just absolutely no belief. There was no belief in higher power, no belief in God, outrightly rejected all forms of religion or religious ideology. So for me, it was quite surprising. Like we started, I suppose, going down in a more deeper path in our messaging and keeping in contact. And it came as a surprise to me when you were like, I believe in something. And I was like, whoa, that's a big shift in the past since I last seen you. So I feel it's important to highlight that. So what kind of got you to that point, like from completely rejecting any form of afterlife or bigger meaning than this, to believing in something?
Well, it's funny because like the reasons that have actually led me to that aren't like religion or people talking about religion or anything like that. And I think that's important to highlight, that like any concept of spirituality, like sure, Sam Harris's book Waking Up is all about the like difference between spirituality and religion. And that's been a big part of, I guess, my development in that regard, because I've always considered myself open-minded, and perhaps that wasn't the case as far as religion's gone, because I've always been pretty, as you're saying, pretty like
closed-minded.
Yeah, like closed-minded, but thinking that I'm like the open-minded one because I'm on the opposite end to like all these like, and I still have like a somewhat negative view of organized religion as a whole, but
yes,
in terms of the actual belief itself, I don't have a problem with. People can believe whatever they want, but people like I don't know if anyone's listening like familiar with like Graham Hancock, his perspective on things, like really kind of the way he discusses consciousness. He has a banned TED talk called The War on Consciousness, which I remember when I watched it and I was like, the way he was talking about things, it made sense, but at the same time, it was like, it should be mad. It should be the sort of thing that you hear and you immediately just go, no, that can't be true. That there can't be any truth to that whatsoever. But hearing it and being able to think about it and thinking like, we actually know so little about consciousness. Consciousness is like such a mystery to us, and yet we claim to kind of understand it and understand how it relates to like the universe or anything like that. We don't, and it's that sort of mystery. I don't think we should attribute it to like gods or anything like that, but we shouldn't also close any sort of conversation about it off either. It should be something that we're able to come up with ideas about and discuss, and I guess that's what led me to that place.
I guess in the large part, we are, for the most part, quite an ignorant race because
Yes.
we do not really understand anything about anything. Like, I suppose this day and age, especially with such a focus and, I don't know, like belief in science, that kind of, if you can't prove it, if science can't prove X, then X doesn't exist or X can't be possible just because science
Yeah.
doesn't understand it. So I guess that's just probably like an interesting shift in society in general, how it's went from, you know, religious control and, you know, that power of the religion, and now it's kind of shifted to science and whatever science
It
says.
has, yeah.
And I guess that kind of discredits, you know, when people go down the road of spirituality or consciousness, it's because we can't quantify it. Like, you can't physically, like, you know, put it in a box. It's like, if you can't do
Yeah.
that, then it obviously doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think that's why it ends up more towards the realm of like psychology, because sure, you'll get people who say that psychology isn't a science because you can't, like, it's not the same as with physics or chemistry where everything can be like tested by instruments and stuff like that. Like, you do have elements like that in psychology, but a lot of psychology is based on like
It's observation.
recorded subjective experiences, and it's like that can be impossible to like contrast and compare, and so that's how you end up in these like kind of weird discussions and like situations and stuff like that, because you know, how can you express something that you're feeling when you don't even necessarily understand it yourself? I think that's kind of one of the big problems.
Yeah, I would say so. Especially as you're saying, because we don't really have any understanding of it. Like, you know, personally, for me, I've always believed, although similarly to you, I've always rejected like the idea of organized religion. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and it's been this a country destroyed by religious conflict and division.
Yeah.
So I've never accepted it. But like, I've always believed in something, but I never allowed myself to believe in what I believed because I didn't understand it, and because then I couldn't separate that, my belief in something, I couldn't separate that from them believing in a religion. So I think like
Yeah. Yeah.
religion, that's what I don't believe in, but there's something, you know, but I just couldn't quite figure out what. And even now, I don't, you know, I don't understand, but I'm of the mindset that there's a purpose to every single thing or every single coincidence that pops up in our life. Even if science doesn't understand it, it has a significance for me, and I feel that. And I guess it's just kind of embracing that idea of like belief and faith, surrendering to the unknown that we don't know and we might never know. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose it kind of probably want to highlight to people what kind of took you down the road of psychology, because you were just talking about it there, when you were going on about consciousness and stuff. So what kind of led you down the road to choosing to study that?
Well, so it's actually, when I tell this reason, because it's such a silly reason to get into anything, but when I was in high school, I actually planned on studying business management. I loved like the idea of like having a company and like making a product and like buying and selling stuff. Like, it always fascinated me. And for most of my time in high school, that's what I planned on doing at university. It was business management because I was good at it in school. And in my last year of school, they offered like you could do psychology, and it was like it was done through a local college rather than the school. And I just took it because I was like, yeah, psychology, why not? I like science. I'll try something new. And I don't know, it really appealed to me. And why I ended up studying at university actually comes down to a TV show called Lie to Me, which is basically it's it's very loosely based on like what's the guy's name? Uh, Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman is the guy's name, who discovered
Have you got his name written on your wall there or something?
I have one of his books over there. I was like,
Yeah, right.
I yeah, he discovered micro expressions, which is like for like I think it's like an eighth of a second your face will show an emotion, and you can like learn to detect it, and it kind of shows when someone's like being deceitful or like what their true emotions are. And they made a TV show that was like basically people solving crimes and stuff like that with it. Uh, but that whole sort of thing about like how facial expressions can reflect something that's going on in your brain, like without us even being aware of it, because we're not aware that we do micro expressions. It's such a subconscious act, and something about that just like appealed to me in a way that I was like, you know what, I'm not going to go do business management. I'm going to go do psychology without even like properly looking into what it involved. It was a bit of an impulse. That's probably one of two impulsive decisions I've made in my life. Studying psychology at university and moving to Spain. That's probably like the yeah. That's how I ended up doing psychology. And I guess when I left uni, I never planned on taking it further because I couldn't get into a job straight away like a lot of people.
No, and with
Um,
our degree, you like physically need to do an additional, just
yeah,
because of a PhD,
yeah.
you can't just use. It's another couple of years. So
Yeah, it's also very like oversaturated. Like even if you think about our university, you have what like 200 people that were like graduating at the end of the year.
yeah, and in fairness, most of them it was probably, I would say, 80%, 85% female. Female
Oh,
dominated
definitely,
professions.
definitely.
Um, I'm just trying to remember here. You did your dissertation, your final project for
Yeah,
degree on facial expressions. Correct me if I'm wrong, and empathy and how we detect that. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. And that was actually it's funny because I hadn't planned on doing it on facial expressions originally, and it was purely just in that stage where you have to come up with a topic. One of my previous lectures or something had been about facial expressions, and they were looking at this one experiment in particular, and an idea had popped into my head that I don't want to go obviously into too much depth about this, but I'd had this idea that maybe you can teach, like you've got people who are uh, have high affective empathy, which is like you can feel the emotions of others. Essentially, you're better at picking up and kind of like if somebody's sad, you'll feel sad. If somebody's happy, you'll feel happy. And you've got cognitive empathy, which is like being able to read people's facial expressions, like telling when somebody else is sad, when someone else is happy. And I basically thought that maybe you could teach people how to read facial expressions in order to improve their empathy. Like if they're better at being able to look at someone and know exactly what they're feeling, then maybe they'll feel it more as well. But that became too complicated to try and do. So my actual dissertation ended up being about whether you can predict somebody's empathy levels by their ability to read facial expressions.
That's what
So
I was literally just writing a note down to remind me to ask you. Is it possible to teach someone to be more empathetic? Can
I
you?
think I that isn't like I don't know a great deal about it, but I have come across occasionally things. I think you can learn to be more empathetic. It takes like you get like empathy meditations and stuff where you kind of practice being empathetic, and with practice you can, if somebody wasn't willing to learn, I don't think you could teach them without them sort of engaging in it. But like
Yeah.
if you as an individual wanted to be more empathetic, yeah, I think you certainly can. I think there's a few different ways you can do it, but certainly empathy meditation is one that I've come across. Something that maybe a lot of people could use, I think, in today's world. I think if we had a bit more empathy, then
Yeah, there's I don't know, never too much empathy, never too much gratitude or kindness or anything.
mm,
Something that we definitely would be lacking. I just want to take it back there. You said about studying psychology, and it was a really impulsive decision, similar to your move to Spain, to Barcelona. So I want to just get your perspective on this to share. To me, when I hear that, that is like, it's not impulse. The way I'm perceiving the world, and the more I'm stepping into this belief and this part of myself, is that while at the time, obviously you would have been 18 and then, I don't know, 24, like you would have been less open to this kind of ideology. But
yeah,
to me, when I hear that, that's like less impulse. Feels like impulse at the time, but it's more, I don't know. I guess I was going to say like not coincidence, but maybe it is
like
coincidence,
like synchronicity, almost like
or intuition is the word I'm looking for. Almost like
intuition. Yeah,
intuitively
yeah.
being pulled towards psychology, and then intuitively you were taken away to Barcelona. And I guess I just wanted to get your perspective on the idea of intuition and what you take from that.
Well, I think intuition is like it's often like an understated thing, but to me, intuition is I've always viewed it as being like your subconscious mind, like nudging you in a certain direction. And they've done studies on this, to be fair, and like they found that your intuition is like if in relation to say cards, for example, your intuition is right like 50% of the time. Like it comes down to pretty much the same as chance. But with something more emotional and where you've got more experience and stuff like that, those odds go up. So I've always viewed intuition as being like, I mean, I guess this could take you down a path into a whole conversation about free will and stuff like that. But to me, intuition is
I don't
always
think we've got enough time in the day to get into that.
I don't think there is, no. Yeah, I think intuition is basically, you can have, when you make a decision that feels impulsive, but it's like your gut instinct sort of telling you that, either telling you that it's the right decision or telling you that it might be the wrong decision, but it's still worth taking. To me, that comes down to your subconscious mind having taken in so much raw data that it almost like connects dots. Because obviously your subconscious mind like takes in like so much more than what your conscious mind does.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So that's how I've always viewed it. I don't know if there's necessarily like a huge scientific backing of that idea, but that's kind of been my
I suppose it can't really be a scientific backing. Like, there could be, I don't know, research on it, but again, that's one of the things you can't quantify. How do you know? How do you measure intuition? Like, there's no way to really. Well, maybe there is. I don't know. I haven't studied psychology or practiced in 5 years, 6 years. So in terms of research and data collection, I am uninformed. I'm not going to pretend that I am. But when you mentioned there that your take on it is that it's your subconscious mind, like connecting dots from all of the raw data that we can't process in our conscious mind, because there is too much data. Even in this room I'm in now, it's like pretty plain. There's no advertising, but there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stuff, and we can't be aware of it and we can't take it all in simultaneously. But I guess for me, whenever I think of intuition, I don't think of it like that. I think of it almost as like something beyond me is like guiding me almost. Whenever I have that feeling come up, it's not, and it's obviously really interesting because it's another way for me to now perceive that, and it could very well be that's certainly a psychological explanation that you can apply to it 100%. But to me, that's more like, I don't know, I guess you could go into the idea of like a collective consciousness or subconscious. It's like, I know this feeling I'm getting now because there's something bad is going to happen. It's because whoever's going to cause the bad act, their subconscious is obviously connected to mine, and therefore they're communicating and sort of, so that's what that feeling is. But yeah, to me, I guess I see it more from a spiritual perspective. It's not psychological. It's when I feel that, it's like I'm being given a message that, as you say, either what I'm doing is right or it's a warning. Don't do this.
Yeah, of course. I guess there's every possibility that both those things are true, and that it could be relayed through your subconscious mind, but actually could be a larger thing that's ultimately sort of, almost like a flow of like thought that comes through your subconscious mind to your conscious mind and then leads to action, but could be coming from anywhere.
Could be anything, really. I guess it would be ignorant to not consider the fact that both potentialities are possible, that it could be the collective and it could be psychological and it could be coming from a higher power, but I guess there's no way to ever really quantify it.
No.
But what I wanted to lead on from was back into your writing. So obviously we have a bit of background now on who you are and what you believe in and why you went down the road of psychology, and I guess I kind of want to know a bit more about the writing that you do and what kind of articles and what you kind of enjoy writing about and what you kind of don't like writing about. So yeah, I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, so I guess it varies depending on what type of writing I'm doing, because my freelance writing can involve anything. Like I've written like travel guides for like an app. I've written reviews for things. I guess like my main source of income has come from, I can't be too specific because I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement for it, but writing sort of like spirituality articles, that's been consistent for the last, that's like I started in 2017 and found that work pretty quickly. So you're talking like 3 to 4 years of, I guess, spirituality. And it's like for them, the people that I write for, spirituality is, I guess, the opposite of what we were saying. So it's for them, spirituality and religion are like part of the same coin. They're like two sides of the same coin. Whereas for us, it would be religion is one thing and spirituality is another thing. And that doesn't mean there's no overlap in certain areas where you can't believe in both. But yeah, I got this like sort of writing job, and I made it very clear to them about my religious views and like my sort of beliefs and stuff. But it's led to me just doing a lot of research and stuff into things that perhaps I wouldn't have looked at otherwise. And so obviously a lot of things will be more, there's some things that I'll hear and I'll be like, right, that isn't something I can believe in. But there's some things that are, especially if it relates to psychology in any way, and it can be sort of like viewed through the lens of, I guess, subconscious activity or like the interaction between the subconscious and conscious mind, then there's a lot of things to me that make sense and definitely tie into the idea of intuition, which obviously we were talking about earlier. Yeah, so that's like, I guess, job-wise, I do that. I also write like mental health stuff, which is purely like personal. That's just something I do in my free time. I don't get paid for that.
When you say you do that in your free time, when you write that, are you like publishing it anywhere, or are you just kind of journaling, sort of like, what do you mean specifically?
So I have a blog that's, I mean, everyone has a blog these days, but I have a blog that's called Taming the Anxiety Beast. And so it's based on, I guess, the idea of, we have this weird perception of anxiety that it's this big, like, hideous creature that's like more powerful than us, that's scary, intimidating, and it can be, it absolutely can be. Anxiety is awful, but how we view it determines how powerful it is. And if you're able to shift your perspective on anxiety, you find very, very quickly that its power shrinks and suddenly becomes incredibly manageable. And the more manageable it becomes, the less intimidating it is, until it's just it's an inconvenience. It's not a thing that controls your life. It's not a thing that limits your experience. It's just something that, yeah, you have to live with, and it's not ideal, but it's not, it's not crippling you. It's not holding you back in the same way.
I guess
so this is
whenever you're
kind
in
of
that
based on
kind
the
of,
idea.
I guess whenever you're in that kind of anxious frame of mind, though, someone with anxiety, and obviously, I guess it's important to point out here that you, for my entire time of knowing you and living together at university, you very much were like a really anxious person, in particularly like social situations, and I suppose even myself.
Yeah.
But both of us, I guess, were largely unaware that we were experiencing that at the time.
Yeah, of course. And it's strange because like we were both studying psychology. Like we were both studying psychology, learning about mental health issues. And I don't think I knew I had anxiety until I think maybe third year of uni is when I started to kind of pick up on what it was. Didn't really get anything for it until my last year of uni. But you're right. It was like I got to a point where I couldn't go to lectures, couldn't go to classes. Everything was like, even things like, people like who don't understand anxiety think it's strange, but like something as simple as like going to get your hair cut or going to the shop or like, a dentist appointment or stuff like that. It's like, it becomes this obstacle that seems like you won't be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you can't do it, because you do. It's a simple task. It's a simple thing. And in your head, you're like, you can try and rationalize it all you want, but it's not a rational thing. Like, it's not as simple as telling yourself, like, it's not a big deal, because it's not a big deal. And that's kind of what I think frustrates people with anxiety, because when people who don't have anxiety are saying, yeah, but what are you anxious about? It's just like, you're just speaking to someone.
Everything.
Yeah, everything. And that's what it is. And it's irrational in your head, but like, it's coming from a place that you don't understand, and it's making you feel things that you don't understand. And when you can't even put a label on it and can't even say it's anxiety, it's worse, because you're just feeling all these things and you just think that's your life, that's who you are, like that's normal for you, is this like uncomfortable, like fucking nervous wreck that like can't even like interact with people in like the simplest of ways. But it's it's strange. It's strange.
I think it is really difficult for people who have never experienced it. Like, I still get bouts of it now. Like, obviously I'm aware of it. I've done considerable work to manage it better and understand it better. And like, as you say, I think one of the most important things was being actually finally having it like diagnosed and understanding that I wasn't like paranoid. And like, there was honestly a time when we were at university, and because I was taking a lot of drugs and, a lot of MDMA and partying a lot. And I thought like I was like, I don't know, like starting to like develop schizophrenia, because I understood like, okay, schizophrenics are generally paranoid. So I was like, okay, I'm having all these thoughts, like, are people looking at me, or like, are they laughing at me? Are they
Yeah.
talking about me? And I guess I was like, I pulled myself like, quite deep into that. It's like, gosh, am I losing my mind here completely? And then I guess, I don't know, I didn't actually understand I had anxiety, out of control anxiety, I guess, until I was probably 26 or 27. So that's like
Yeah.
4 years after we graduated university, studied this almost for 4 years, anxiety and depression, and physically not understanding that is why, that shyness, that fear of being rejected, that fear of saying something wrong in a conversation and then people laughing at you, and then that ruminating on that for like days and days and days. Oh, how could I be so silly to make that mistake? Even on this podcast, like, oh, what if I say something wrong? It's like, oh no, and then you ruminate on it for like 2 weeks. Obviously, it's not
Yeah.
as bad as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so whenever we were at uni, how bad would you have said? Obviously, we finished uni in 2015, so it's been like 6 years.
Yeah.
How much of an effect was your anxiety having on you in personal life, just in general, and with the studying as well?
So I think one thing that I found interesting, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, is that it's important to highlight the distinction between anxiety and shyness, nervousness, lack of confidence, introvertedness. Because when I went to university, I had the lowest level of confidence possible, but I wouldn't have described what I felt in situations as anxiety. Even looking back, like social situations were uncomfortable, but I didn't feel anxious in the way that I would like afterwards, like later on in life. Um, that got progressively worse, and I think largely due to alcohol. I think alcohol was a major factor in making my anxiety get progressively worse throughout my time at university. Because it becomes a crutch, and then you have those hangover days that are so brutal, and you're sat in these like lectures or like on a bus full of people, and you're sweating, and like you get all these symptoms that you would get with like anxiety or an anxiety attack or even a panic attack. Um, but for me, it got progressively worse throughout university, and so it got to the point where like it wasn't every day, but say I had to go and do exams. Every single exam I did at university, I would have like, you could argue whether it was an anxiety attack or a panic attack, maybe like a low level panic attack, but like it was the first like half hour to 45 minutes, I was basically just sat trying to convince myself that I didn't need to leave the room, like that I didn't need to go and like be sick, or I didn't need to, like the first few times it happened, I thought I was dying. Like it sounds like such a, like people who don't experience it think it's like crazy, but you don't know what's going on with your body, and you're experiencing these like heart palpitations, you're sweating, you're either not breathing at all or you're breathing like rapid. Um, and that just got worse and worse, and it spread to other situations. Like obviously we touched on like social anxiety, which I would say is like my primary form of anxiety.
I'm just going to interject here really quickly, because I feel this is important to highlight. Like, as I said, me and you lived together for 3 years, and I can probably speak in behalf of all of our other housemates before we lived together, like just me and you. But I was completely unaware that this was affecting you in that way, and we were, studying together,
Yeah.
going to class together. I was completely ignorant to that happening to you.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's the same with everyone, because like obviously I didn't know that you had any sort of anxiety issues or anything like that. It's only in hindsight that we can look back and be like, it's kind of crazy that we were all. But I think that kind of shows you how much society has changed in the last few years, because people are so open about that stuff now. Like even just a few people a few years younger than us will quite happily speak to their pals about like the struggle that they're going through. They're like, and there's more of a focus on mental health, so they actually are aware of things like anxiety and depression and like suicidal thoughts and tendencies and stuff like that. We didn't have that at that age, and to think that was only like 10 years ago less, and there wasn't that awareness in the same way that there is
No.
today.
Like, we were talking in one of many voice notes. I can't pinpoint a specific time or date in this, but like you were even saying, like your younger brother, for example, like his generation are like they're meditating at the age of 21. Like that's something I
Yeah.
didn't even know what meditating was when we were,
No.
in that age.
No.
That's something that I've only really kind of gotten to grips with or an understanding of in the past 2 years or so. But like people
Yes.
that were going through what we were going through back then are doing that stuff, and
Yeah,
we didn't have
exactly.
any idea about it.
No, I remember the first time I meditated was after reading. So it would have been last year of university. So you're talking like what, 23, 24, 22 maybe. I don't know, around about that age. And it was after reading that Sam Harris book, Waking Up, where
Yes.
he refers to a YouTube video that he's put up for free that you can go and listen to, and it's a
Yeah.
guided meditation. That was the first time I ever meditated. And after doing it that once, I didn't do it again for like months, if not like years.
Same.
Because it just you think it's going to do something crazy the first time you do it. And like I think that was maybe why we'd ever looked into meditation, because it's like either something you commit your life to become like a monk who like meditates every day and like develops that sort of state of mind, or what's the point? Like it doesn't. We want that instant kind of like
Gratification.
there's no like delayed gratification or anything. Yeah, you have to have that instant like hit of like whatever it would be, spiritual experiences or reduced anxiety. You just expect a magic fix, and when meditation doesn't do that the first time, you're like, well, what's the
And
point in that?
even after the first time, it does progressively, reduce those symptoms and
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
but you'll still find like I think the perception people have of meditation is when you meditate, you're going to just automatically enter this Zen state of peace and your mind will be completely empty. But most of the time, it's not. Your mind is still, incessant and it's still in a state of constant, overdrive. And then
Yeah.
people see that and they're doing it and they're like, well, the meditation's obviously not working because my mind's still all over the place and has these mad, crazy thoughts. So I'm just not gonna do it. It's obviously not working. But that's not the point of meditation. The point of meditation
No.
is just to be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awareness takes the power away from the incessantness of the mind.
I think that's the problem, is that if people go into meditation with an expectation, like no matter what that expectation is, if the expectation isn't simply I'm meditating to meditate, then you're going to be disappointed because you never really know what you're going to get from meditation. Like one day, like I used to meditate just before I went to bed, and then I started to find that after meditation, my mind was more active than it was before. Like that's not what you think is going to happen when you meditate. You think you're going to come out of it and be like zen and like absolutely rested, and sometimes you are. Sometimes that's exactly how you come out of it. But sometimes your brain has become so active, like becoming aware of certain sensations or passing thoughts that are entering consciousness and stuff like that. And like, or you'll have like, I remember the first profound meditation experience I had. I think it might have been one of Sam Harris's ones actually, but this was like, you're talking years ago. And he was talking about seeing these like different colored strands as being like representative of different parts of the body. And then if you just felt a sensation on a certain part of your body, it would like pluck a strand. And I could see with like my eyes closed, I could see these strands and could feel them vibrate and stuff. And it was so like strange and abnormal in comparison to anything else I'd experienced before.
Would you compare that to a sort of a psychedelic experience, or is it something different?
I think it's something different, but certainly something similar. Like I think it's the removal of yourself from, like we've talked about this before in like voice notes and stuff, but we have this like kind of weird notion that we're here in our heads, we're like behind the eyes,
Yes.
and we're in a little like control room somewhere, like operating switches and stuff like that. And what meditation can do and what psychedelics can do is make you aware that that is not the case. And sometimes it does it quite abruptly. And I think that's certainly a thing that they share. And I think you get quite a few people who are like pro meditation and pro psychedelics who will say that actually you can get like the same sort of experience from both of them. Yeah, I think it just depends. But again, I think it's almost like a roll of the dice every time. You never really know what you're going to experience. And if you go into it like thinking, oh, I want to go into and get this from it, then you're not going to, and you're actually going to limit what you could be experiencing as a result, because you're going in, even if you think that you're like closing off your thoughts or like becoming aware of your thoughts, actually what you're doing is trying to direct your thoughts towards that specific outcome. And that obviously limits the capabilities of like meditation or psychedelics or
Yeah, you're
any
trying to
sort
force
of
it.
experience. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But obviously, like I guess it's important to note as well, there are different types of meditations. Like there are meditations where you can focus and direct
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah,
Still, the main purpose of it is just to bring awareness to everything. Like, for example, right now, I guess I'm sitting on my sofa and I'm actively bringing my awareness to the feelings of my feet touching the floor, the pressure and the tingling. And then I'm also talking to you, but I've got this pen in my hand and I'm trying to observe all of that. But it's hard. It's like, if you don't train, it's like a muscle. If you don't train it, then it's just physically not possible for your mind to be aware of all of that all at once. Um,
yeah.
so it takes practice for sure. But
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think that's why most people give up, as you say, because they have an expectation, and then when it doesn't live up to that expectation, it must not be working. So therefore, well, this is pointless, and it doesn't serve any relevance.
The thing that I noticed most was that whenever I got into sort of routinely doing meditation, I think I did it like solidly for like every single day for about like I think 20 days or something. And I can't remember why, but I stopped doing it for a bit and like kind of got out of the habit. And I noticed a difference in that sense. Like I hadn't noticed a huge difference while I was doing it every day because it's so gradual and you're not necessarily becoming aware of any changes in your mind. But when you then stop doing it, I think it's like exercise, right? It's like you're saying, it's like a
Mhm.
muscle. If you're exercising like constantly for like a long period of time, you might feel like you're getting a bit stronger or a bit fitter, but you won't notice anything crazy. The second you stop exercising and then try to go back to it, you will notice that your like fitness has dropped. And that then makes you be like, wow, I must have improved quite a bit if this is how much I'm like suddenly dropping in terms of my like physical performance. I think meditation is very similar to that. I think if you lose the habit, you don't have to do it every day, but you want to be doing it like quite frequently to notice any sort of real benefits or real change.
I would agree with that. Like Sam Harris, again, if anyone is unfamiliar with this name, then I would urge you, as I'm sure Cammy would as well, to look him up on YouTube and just listen to him or even do one of his meditations. But I downloaded his app. It is called
Mm,
Waking Up, and it's free. And he did. He's a man like he's changed the course, the beginner introductory course now. But I think when I did it, it was like 50 days, and it was like a 10-minute meditation once a day, just for 50 days straight.
yeah.
I think he's dropped it to 30 now because I don't know, 30 is probably just a bit.
Yeah, 30. I think that's the one I did.
Yeah. But for me, man, I find 10 minutes a day, and some of them were like 7 and some were 12. It was just average 10 minutes a day. And I would do it twice a day. I'm the kind of person when I do stuff, it's like I'm not going to do, I'm not going to do a half measure. I'm going to do more than what they're telling me to do because I want the benefit of it. I'm just going to completely pour myself into it. But yeah, I noticed a massive shift, especially as well. I think the thing that I was going through a lot of stuff, like a lot of really damaging, deeply traumatizing emotional stuff at the time when this kind of just came into my life again. And like we said, I haven't meditated since the end of university up until this point of beginning that course. So that's like 7 years. But yeah, I think the thing that sort of struck me whenever I bought this book, I can't remember who it's by, but it was just purely about meditation, and it was these two psychologists. But I suppose similarly to Sam Harris, they sort of had a belief in the power of meditation and how it actually physically changes the structures of your brain. It changes that. And I may misquote this if anyone is, more informed in the structures of the brain or psychology than I. As I said, I haven't been in that field in, I don't know, 6 years. But from my understanding of it, the act of meditation physically decreases the gray matter or white matter in your brain and increases the other. But I think the most important thing for me that stood out was there's a thing called the default mode network, and that's like the part of your brain
Yeah.
that just goes, it's just the incessant part. But whenever you actually physically start to meditate, the connection between, I think it's somewhere in the frontal part of your brain, the connection to that actually starts to close off and shrink. So the act of meditation physically alters what is going on in your mind, not just on like a psychological level, but it physically changes your brain. And I guess that's what for me anyway, I guess that's what people would kind of expect. Okay, if I meditate, then I will become less anxious. And there's science that backs that up. It will physically change your brain.
Yeah.
But for me, that was one of the things that was like, whoa, that's kind of like, okay, I've studied this. I understand that that's quantifiable. It's physical. And then it kind of progressed into the more, okay, so it's not just about changing my brain. It's actually becoming just aware of being, and I suppose that more spiritual side of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting as well that we were talking about the similarities between meditation and psychedelics, because now that they're researching a lot more into using psychedelics as a form of, like, you have like psychedelic therapy, which combines usually psilocybin with like someone will have like a therapist and like a medical professional with them while they go into this like very deep trip. And the reason for that is that the way that I heard it being described best was that your default mode network, which obviously you were just talking about there, it's like that's like a snow globe, right? And it's all the like snowflakes that are like layered down at the bottom of the snow globe. And when you go on this trip or this, like, I guess it could be a meditative experience, it's like somebody shakes the snow globe. And then as the snow falls back down again, that's essentially like your default mode network realigning itself into a different set of like pathways, which can then be used to, obviously, if you've got if you've got pathways that are set up that make you anxious, and then suddenly that's reset, it means that when you next go into a situation, you can start from fresh. You might still have anxious feelings, but you'll be aware that it won't be as intense, and it's because you expect to feel anxious that makes you anxious, rather than it being, the pathway in your brain that's being triggered, like, oh, this happened last time I was in this situation, so clearly I must react like this way. And so I think the sort of connection between the default mode network and those sort of reactions is, yes, exciting, I think, in terms of future research.
It definitely is. And I guess, sorry, it's just actually popped back into my mind. The default mode network it's connected to your amygdala, and the amygdala is the part of your brain that, it signals these anxious feelings.
Yeah.
So whenever when that connection starts to shift and change, that's why the anxiety physically reduces. And again, as I said, if there's any psychologists or neuroscientists or whatever listening to this, I'm not claiming that I am. Obviously, I may be misinformed or may not be quoting things exactly there, but anyone feel free, obviously, as you should always do, to do your own research and check critically into anything that you hear on, I don't know, from us or from any other podcast or source. But
Yeah.
Cam, I guess there was one other thing I wanted to bring up. So obviously, anxiety has had quite a profound impact on both yourself and I. I've spoken, I don't know, I speak publicly about it. I'm quite vocal about it. I have been for a long time now. But you are a published author, and you actually wrote a book on anxiety. So I suppose, I guess, now I haven't read it. I haven't actually been reading books. I haven't read a book in a couple of months now, man. I'm slacking. But I guess, yeah, I think it'd be cool if you could just, I suppose, tell me and the people that are listening about what the book is, why you wrote it, and yeah, what it can do for people.
Yeah, of course. If I start rambling here, feel free to interrupt me. But so I should specify that it's a self-published book. Like, I wrote this just purely as an exercise for myself. I think it was a way to explore my own sort of journey, I guess you could say. It's like an anxiety journey, is what I refer to it as, like, in my blog and in this book. Like you're saying, anxiety has been a big part of my life. And just before I wrote it, so after university, I moved back with my parents. I didn't have a job, I was unemployed and had no real prospects or anything like that. I started to, I guess you would, I never got diagnosed, but I definitely entered into like a depressive episode for most of that year. And then through like a series of different events, I eventually started to work on my anxiety. And I found that looking back in hindsight, I found that it was a shift in perspective was the key thing. And what I would describe it as, and this isn't meant to take away anything from people's experiences with anxiety. I'm not downplaying them. Like, obviously, I've had horrific anxiety experiences. I know how troubling it can be. But to me, anxiety is just discomfort at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't harm you other than your reaction to it, you know? It's like your physical reaction, but also your how you choose to avoid it or what you do when in the moment that creates the damage. And so I started writing, it actually started out as a blog post. I was just going to write this blog post called Embracing Discomfort. And it was just going to be the idea that if you can get into a mindset where you approach anxiety as you would any other uncomfortable situation, I often use cold water exposure as an example of that. If you can get to cold water and you can like have a cold shower and you can like embrace it and learn to actually enjoy it. Like we've talked about this before, the idea of like cold showers and their benefits. And yeah, so I started writing this book what I wanted to do was tell a true anxiety story. So it's kind of a combination of my own experiences with scientific research and like strategies for reducing the impact that anxiety has on your life. But the underlying theme of it is that if you can learn to just treat anxiety as discomfort, if you treat it as you would a cold shower or an ice bath or cold water and just go into it and be like, yeah, I feel uncomfortable. Like that is the truth of the matter. Like I'm sweaty, my mind's been a bit active, my heart might be like, I might be having heart palpitations or my heart might be racing. It's like, that's uncomfortable, but that's all that's going to happen. And if you can learn to, and I'm not saying it's easy to do this, like I didn't do it consciously. It's just something that started to happen as a result of like various events in my life. But you can start to sort of see anxiety in any anxiety triggering situation. It's just been a moment of discomfort. And if you then approach it as like a challenge, like this is going to be uncomfortable, but if I get through this, I will be better for it. I will have overcome something that was difficult for me to do. Then you start to find that your anxiety just reduces. Like we were talking about earlier when I was saying, that's where the sort of title for my blog came from, was Taming the Anxiety Beast, is the idea that the more you understand it and the more that you view it as just this inconvenience rather than this big, massive, monstrous creature, the less power it has over you and the less threatening it seems. It's just uncomfortable.
Yeah, it definitely is uncomfortable. 100%.
But I realize that sounds like such a simplification, and such it plays it down, but that's been a big part of how I've gone from like being unable to like speak to people. I'm still not a hugely sociable person, but it's not because of anxiety. It's just because I don't generally like, you know.
Well, you're an introvert, and like you always have been. And suppose
Yeah,
people think personal friend, like people think I am outgoing and extroverted, but man, I don't know, I'm quite happy. Like even over lockdown, whenever quarantine kicked in, I was overjoyed at the prospect of just getting to stay in my house. You know, not like I could still have room, I could go outside and stuff, but it's like sweet, this, you know. But obviously, I have to respect other people, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to distinguish the fact that you can be introverted, you know, enjoy being by yourself and, you know, not socializing, and distinguish the fact that that's separate from being anxious, you know, just because you're introverted.
Absolutely.
Anxious. But I guess if you don't have an understanding of the two, if you don't really understand that, then I suppose there can be an overlap, definitely.
Well,
and if you're an anxious introvert, well, then that can be problematic, as it was for you.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things I actually talk about in the book, and it's I refer to it as being the anxiety crutch. I have all these like weird random terms I've come up with that, like, if you've never read it, it'll make no sense. But that when your anxiety starts to improve, you're going to go into a situation with an expectation that you're going to feel anxious because you felt anxious in that situation before, or you're going to expect the opposite. You're going to expect that you're suddenly charismatic, you're suddenly confident, you're suddenly sociable. And that isn't the case. Like anxiety may have been a part of you and it may like impact your life, but even if you got rid of anxiety completely, things will become easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be shy in social situations, or that, you know, you'll suddenly become like an incredible public speaker, or those things would become easier to obtain. And it might be possible that for your first time in your life, you're able to actually imagine doing those things without like crumbling under the pressure of like anxiety. But yeah, I think like you're saying, that distinction is very, if someone had said to me a few years ago that I'd be like appearing on a podcast, I'd be like, absolutely not, like never, like that'd be my idea of absolute hell. But yeah, I've come a long way since those days. Since I haven't had an anxiety attack in a long time. Whereas it used to be like almost a daily thing for me that I would feel that it's like you're at the bottom of the sea and it's just like the pressure pushing down on you.
When you
I
say an
think,
anxiety attack, I guess I just want to like, can you expand on that? Like, obviously, you would
yeah,
still feel anxious day to day. That you'll still feel like, oh, you'll still have anxious thoughts and still feel anxiety. But when you say anxiety
yeah.
attack, what do you mean specifically?
So I think there's a lot of debate about the difference between sort of like anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And my understanding of it might be wrong, but for me, an anxiety attack is you could like you're saying you could day to day have anxiety. Like I could be going say I don't know, I'm trying to think of a situation. Say I was going to meet new people.
Hmm.
I might feel anxious doing that, but it's not it's not stopping me. It's not making me suddenly think like, how can I get out of doing this?
Yeah.
What can I do instead? Like, whereas for an anxiety attack would be when suddenly it's like it's hard to describe, but it's like something grips your heart. It's like you suddenly feel this pressure around your heart, or like in your chest, or like in your mind. It just becomes like foggy, and like you feel like you're losing control, and suddenly there isn't anything else happening in the world. The only thing that's happening is your anxiety, and that is like that becomes your existence, that becomes your reality. And to me, that's what an anxiety attack is, and that can overlap with a panic attack in terms of like physical symptoms. But panic attacks tend to be more random, like they can be triggered by things, but a lot of people who have panic attacks, it's the fear of a panic attack that causes it, which I guess is kind of similar to anxiety because it's fear of anxiety that often makes you worried. Like if I'm going into a situation where I'm like, if I start having anxiety, then what do I do? Like a good example would be I used to get anxiety about going on planes, but I quickly discovered that it wasn't the plane that was the issue. It was being crammed in with lots of people that would like freak me out. So the first time when I was on a plane and there was nobody sitting near me, I was like surprised at how relaxed I was, how like little anxiety I was experiencing. But you do start to develop that expectation that you're going to feel anxious, and then that becomes like you get anxious about being anxious, about the possibility of being anxious.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say you being on planes, it was being surrounded by the people that makes you anxious because a plane is probably one of the most antisocial places you could ever be, surrounded by other people. Like you'll sit on a flight with someone for 10 hours and you won't speak a word to them,
Yeah,
you won't look
yeah,
at them. And but it's just interesting because, you know, as you said earlier, it's social anxiety has been the big thing for you. So even though you're in that situation, sitting beside someone, you don't have to look at them, you don't have to talk to them, but it still triggers that in you. And I
yeah.
guess it's sort of kind of deeply embedded. But do you have any, and I think it's important to highlight here for people as well, like when you were saying you were having these attacks, this was like, you know, this was happening constantly throughout your life in these situations and at uni as well.
Yeah,
Uni
yeah.
is a stressful, anxiety provoking time anyway, in and of itself, even for someone that doesn't have anxiety or hasn't experienced it. But what have you, because what have you kind of done to, I guess, get to where you are now? Is there anything tangible that, from your experience of getting from, you know, someone who was scared to go to lectures in case you had to speak to people, to where you are now, where, you know, you're able to, you published a book about it, you're able to articulate yourself, you know, coherently, and you've came a long way. And I hopefully people will be able to understand that. Like for me, I know you've obviously come a long way, as have I, compared to how we were back then. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, how what have you done to get to where you are?
I think, I mean, it's difficult to sum up. I think it's a combination of things. So for me, a big thing was being learning to be pushed outside my comfort zone, but in a way that because you can be pushed outside your comfort zone against your will, and it can be horrible, and it can actually make anxiety worse, right? So I don't want to say to people like getting pushed outside your comfort zone is automatically a good thing because it's not. But for me, it was learning that being pushed outside your comfort zone isn't always going to have negative consequences. So like, I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head. Um, when I started working after I'd been unemployed for a year, I got sent to a couple of other stores to like help out there. And to me, that was like hell. I was traveling with people I barely knew. I was working with people I didn't know. Everything was like everything. The entire trip was outside my comfort zone. But when I came back after each time that happened, I realized that day-to-day life felt less intense. It was easier to do the smaller things that had once kind of created this like anxiety reaction. And as I started to sort of, because it's important to note that I wasn't researching ways to get rid of anxiety. Whenever I was going through most of this, I just kind of accepted that it was my life. That's what it was. I was going to have this for the rest of my life, and I basically just had to learn to live with it. But when I moved to Spain, which obviously my anxiety started to improve a bit by then, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do that. But when I moved to Spain, I started to do more research into ways to kind of reduce anxiety and like understanding what anxiety was. The Wim Hof method, which for people who are unaware is a combination of breathing exercises and cold water exposure.
Powerful. I've done this.
Very powerful.
You
Yeah.
have done it combined and individually, both incredibly powerful practices.
Yeah. And the cold water exposure in particular was, it shone a light on something that I'd perhaps known on some level my whole life, because I've always loved cold water. Like, obviously I grew up in Scotland. It's like you have to, yeah, you quickly learn to love cold water, otherwise you don't go outside.
I'm just going to point out, it's not just cold water. Cammy would walk around in Scotland in the dead of winter, like pissing rain and snow and like -2 and 3 in t-shirt, just always in shorts, 365
Shorts,
days,
yeah.
shorts, no matter what the weather.
Yeah, that's certainly, and that hasn't changed either. And I think I always found that when I went into cold water when I was younger, and this was even before like anxiety had developed, because I think like when I was younger, I wasn't anxious, I was just introverted and shy and lacked confidence. And I found that when I went into cold water, my mind became peaceful. And I think it all boils down to mindfulness, really. And when you Wim Hof says this himself, but when you go into like icy cold water, you can't think about past events or possible future events. Your mind is focused right there and then, because you are freezing and every part of your body is like screaming at you out. Yeah. And if you can learn to kind of like embrace that, and that's kind of like why I came up with this title of Embracing Discomfort, is that you can start to embrace difficult situations and uncomfortable situations. That will then start to be able to apply, you'll be able to apply that to any situation in your life. But it's a subconscious thing. It's not that you're actively like, consciousness is a part of it. You do need to kind of direct it, but you'll find that the reaction itself is automatic. Like for me, doing this Wim Hof stuff, it led to a situation where I was in a very crowded like bar, and I started to notice my anxiety was picking up. And when you have anxiety and you start to become aware of that, that's like the worst thing that can happen, because that's like, oh God, I'm getting anxious. It started. It's like a snowball effect. You know that the more you notice it, the more you think about it, the worse it's going to get. And in that moment, I was like, I do feel anxious, but that's like fine. Just like imagine that you're in icy water. Like, what would you do? You wouldn't start to like freak out about it. You would just accept it and allow it to kind of like feel what you're feeling without giving power to it. And so doing the Wim Hof stuff was like a big thing for me, because even though I'd always loved cold water and the cold in general, like you were saying, it actively sort of going into it with that mindset and doing like breathing exercises on top of that does cause a shift psychologically and physically. Like there's so much research into it now that's crazy.
And spiritually as well. I don't think that's
spiritually. Yeah. I think as well, like obviously diet is a major thing. Like you obviously probably better than most people know how restrictive my diet used to be at university and before.
Yeah, let's just highlight the people here that for I think 23 years, Cameron never ate anything green. He ate, aside from pesto. So
Pesto.
From university, it was a diet of milk and Cheetos and pasta pesto and Pizza Hut on our Saturday mornings after a night of partying. So no fruit and vegetables.
No fruit or vegetables. Up until the time I moved to Spain, I had no sort of living memory of consuming fruit or vegetables, like beyond like fruit juice, which or like, you know, stuff like which most people don't even count because it's like it's so full of sugar anyway. But as I started eating healthier, and I did find that there wasn't like an instantaneous, you're not going to like, you don't eat
No.
spinach one day and the next day you're suddenly free of anxiety. But I did start to notice that the days where I would eat healthily, I would feel better like the rest of the week. If I was doing it consistently, I would feel better. And if the days where I ate absolute shit, you do feel like shit. And it's because you're like, your insulin's spiking and crashing, your dopamine's spiking and crashing. It's playing havoc with your digestive tract. It's like there's all these like different things. And so for me, a major thing was like if I had to sum up like my overall sort of anxiety reducing experience, it would be like diet, exercise, and cold water exposure would be like the three things that I would be like, focus on that, because especially the mindfulness aspect of cold water, like being able to sit in, like I use ice baths now as like a system like reboot.
Mm-hmm.
I feel absolutely like low mood, low energy, like low serotonin probably. Or if I'm feeling like super anxious about something and it's not going away and it's lasted a few days, or even if I feel like almost like a depressive episode, I just have an ice bath. And it sounds like it's such a stupid thing because like it's not so much the act of having an ice bath in itself that is a part of it, but it's choosing to put yourself into that situation. And when you come out the other side of it, you do feel the rush that's obviously caused by like endorphins and I won't go into all the details of like the various like neurotransmitters and stress hormones and stuff like that, but you feel fantastic. You feel great. And also you've done something that was difficult, and that is important. That's like being able to enter stressful situations willingly is such an important part. And you can do it in controlled environments. That's what I sort of talk about, is that exercise and cold water exposure are controlled. You can control how uncomfortable you get and for how long, and you can choose to stop it at any time. And so the longer you can go into it for, the sort of more powerful the experience is. But you never have to feel like you're out of your depth in any way. I think that's really important.
I think so, yeah, because I too, I can like vouch and to the power that the cold water exposure has. Like for me, taking an ice bath, that for me, having practiced, cold water exposure for years, it's easy. But the hard thing for me, and I I haven't had a cold shower. I had one this morning, but I haven't had one most of, I'd say, for the past 2 weeks, because I've just been feeling a bit like down and low and a bit just run down.
Yeah.
But getting in the shower in the morning and standing there looking at the tap and turning the cold one on instead of the hot one, man, that is still, I have that little voice in my head that tells me, oh no, don't do that. It's going to be uncomfortable and you're not going to enjoy it. And then sometimes I stand there for 2 to 3 minutes just with my hand on the tap, like, why can't I do this? And then obviously you turn it on and you're like, but then you're invigorated, you're filled with energy. And then you're just like, why was I even stuck in my head contemplating not doing this when I know that it's going to have a positive effect on me? But it's just the power of your mind. Your mind can talk you into or out of anything. And it's the power that you give to that little voice. And I guess, as you were saying, through, what we were talking about, through the act of meditation and mindfulness, bringing awareness to the processes that cause that kind of little voice to come into play, allows you to take the power away from it and take the power back into your own hands and kind of, I don't know, shift your perspective on anxiety.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole thing about the tap, because there's so many similarities between that and like any other sort of like anxiety situation. Like you like freeze just before you do anything like that. Like say, I don't know, you've got social anxiety, but you need to go and knock on a neighbor's door who you don't know very well to like pick up a package, or you need to, I don't know, you get anxiety when you go to, say, lectures, for example, and you're like outside the lecture hall and about to walk in, and you know that once you go in, that's you in. You have that freeze, and it's like part of the like, we always refer to it as the fight or flight response, but there is the third one, which is the freeze response, which is like, isn't discussed as often. And so that sort of like moment where you turn the cold water on is a very similar mechanism to when you don't walk into the lecture hall, or when you don't go to knock on your neighbor's door. And the more you can kind of overcome that, and it's like you're saying, it's like when you choose to ignore that little voice, that little voice starts telling you, oh, but like maybe just wait until tomorrow to do it, or oh, you know what, like have a warm shower today, you can just do a cold shower tomorrow. In those moments, the more automatic your response becomes in terms of just turning the cold tap on, the easier it becomes in the future. It's the case of like, I guess just doing it, and that's the hard part, obviously. But it's yeah, it's interesting. And then obviously your reaction to cold water is very similar to anxiety as well.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of sort of finding out what works best for you as an individual. You know,
Oh, absolutely.
we've discussed a lot of different things here. And I think I just want to actually highlight for anyone that's still listening at this point, we actually had more of a like, I suppose, structured kind of questions to go through with one another, but then it kind of just went down the road of naturally talking about our personal experiences with anxiety. And I guess that's more so relevant now today. If you are listening to this, you know, after the year everyone has just had globally, I guess we're all in a kind of that lost in that anxious state of mind. So hopefully, if you are still here listening, that you are able to take away something of benefit from, you know, the sharing of Cam's and mine experiences and what we've kind of done to overcome that weight of anxiety whenever it takes hold. So I'll point out as well, for anyone that might be interested in having a read. Cam, how long is your book? How many pages is it?
It's pretty small. What I would say, anybody who wants, because I'm in the middle of doing a lot of edits on it, because I've learned so much over the last like 2 or 3 years in relation to anxiety, like coping strategies, different therapy approaches. That I'm trying to go through it and like get it back. Like I think it could use like a lot more work. So what I would say anyone who wants to read it is you can find it on Wattpad for free, like absolutely free access to it. I don't know my username, but if you search for the title of the book, which is just Embracing Discomfort, A Guide to Taming the Anxiety Beast, it should come up.
Cool.
That just means because it's all done by me, it's a bit amateurish, you know. It's all been formatted, edited, written, proofread by me, so it's all kind of, you know, it's probably not up to scratch as a standard book, but yeah, if anyone was interested in reading it, it's a pretty short read, and it's divided up into chapters that are like, you know, quite separate from one another, so you can read through it, start and stop quite easily.
Cool. And I'll just point out as well for anyone that might be interested in it, it is also available on Amazon, because you self-published it on Amazon. So actually, for anyone that's
Yeah,
writing or thinking of publishing a book, Cameron uploaded his book to Amazon, and Amazon publish it on your behalf. I don't think you make a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
money from it as the author, but if any,
No.
I don't know, it might be relevant for someone somewhere out there. But yeah, so you can hit it up on Amazon or, as you said, Wattpad.com. And yeah, I guess that sort of takes us to our natural conclusion, Cam.
Wraps things up, yeah.
Thank you for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time out of your morning. He's just finished work, so it's 10:30 at night for me. So I'm going to bed right now. I'm sure I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you do at
Work.
work.
Yeah, I come back from one job and start another one, so I'll be having some food and then getting back to writing. Probably actually I'll be working on that. I'll be working on my edits for that book at some point today. So
Yeah, sweet as. Well, look, I appreciate it. And obviously, if you're still here listening, thanks very much, guys, for taking the time to listen to both of us ramble on. I'm sure we both appreciate it. I know I do. I'm sure Cam
yeah,
probably.
definitely.
And yeah, we'll see you again next time.